Barney is currently in the midst of opening his new project, Davy, in the heart of Paris. The goal of Davy is to be the focal point for the French bar community, hoping to connect French bartenders to more local French ingredients and smaller craft producers. Barney's presentation is about how to make meaningful changes in a modern bar and how a modern bar can operate. From farm to bar, how far can it go? Barney, please, the stage is yours.
Thanks, brand swag. Also, I just want to say well done to all of the first two speakers beforehand. I'm sure my accent gives it away. I am very Irish, and every talk I'm worried about accidentally swearing. But so far, the first two talks have pretty much been an audition for a Deadpool movie. I think we've heard tit, fuck, and Jesus Christ at least 4 times. So being that I actually grew up in Cork, I feel right at home. I know that everything is meant to be translated within the app. I just want to say to Microsoft's AI, good luck with my accent, as I've been in Cork for 48 hours, so it's coming back with a vengeance. So this is me. This is my tired face. As Sim was saying, I've been invited to this lots of times by our lovely Tony Pancakes here. And I never quite got to make it. That was always really quite upsetting. And this year, back in March, Tony phoned me. And myself and Tony have a strange relationship in which we don't really speak. We just constantly send each other articles about either sleep health, walking, the benefits of inhaling mycelia when you walk in forests, and little strange nerdy stuff, nitrates and ham. Tony phoned me back in March when I had no idea what my life looked like. I had no idea if I was opening a bar. And I said, look, listen, Tony, it's my birthday. And Tony said, look, it's grand. I understand if you can't do it. And I said, no way. You're going to put me in a nice hotel. I get to go to Cork and just talk about a farm for 45 minutes. Sign me up. I'm in. Happy birthday. Thank you. I like my birthday a lot the day after. But me and Tony spoke quite a lot about what we're passionate about in our industry in terms of hospitality and also sharing. Any time I've ever spoken about this has obviously been in the last venture I worked, Little Red Door, where I was very lucky and I got to travel the world and spoke about what we thought and what we wanted Little Red Door to be. And me and Tony spoke a lot about how can we actually give talks or trainings that actually give people advice, similar to what Sean did at the first, where you can leave people with actual actionable things they can do if they're a little bit inspired by what you do and what you care about and how they can take it away with you. And then also, one thing that I get asked a lot, and people have been asking me why I'm here, is what is your talk about? And I kind of push it off and I always say, farms. And I had to do a lot of thinking about why I actually care about this ethos. It didn't just happen. I was working in a bar and we decided this is now our marketing thing. Everything we serve comes from a farm. It's been a big part of, I guess, my foundation, my growing up, a cause of the fact I was very lucky. I grew up from here in Cork all the way up the west coast, the very beautiful part of the world. And then obviously it's quite an impact on the adult that I am today. Also, this is quite a lot of people's first time in Ireland from what I've been speaking to. I know, not yours, Sean. But in Ireland, you'll think of one thing, right? It being a beautiful green country. It's not, but we'll get to that as we get further in. So this is just to give a little bit of background. Sometimes people always say, what is farm to bar? What is farm to glass? Is it just farm to table? Here are 2 best examples. On the right here, I'm sure even if you're not familiar with what this looks like, this is Blue Hill Farm, and now it's Stone Barns in upstate New York. It's a restaurant and a concept that was pushed by Dan Barber. Dan Barber is a very celebrated chef. If you talk about farm-to-table dining or farm-to-fork, whatever moniker you use, it's usually Dan Barber's name that first comes up. For those of you that don't know, eating from locally sourced ingredients and products is nothing new. It's the way we have been living and been evolved to live for hundreds of years. It's probably only recently in the last hundreds of years we started to get disconnected about what we're eating, what we're drinking, where things come from. But probably the most important person, for anyone who doesn't know, this is a very wonderful San Francisco lady, taught how to cook in France by some of the best French chefs. This is Alice Walters, and she is actually credited with starting the movement of farm-to-table restaurants in the wake when supermarkets want to rise and you could buy a raspberry every single day of the year. She was the first person who kind of said, this is a bit weird. Why are we eating oranges when there's no oranges in season? So she's kind of a hero of mine. And also it's quite nice to see that it's a woman accredited with starting this movement and we kind of forget about her. And this is it, very simple. Farm to bar, like we said, what does it mean? There shouldn't really be a difference between a farm to table restaurant or farm to bar bar. To make it really simple, Look, there's a farm. Look, there's a bar. Everything is green. Everything is healthy. So to dive into it a little bit about what we're actually going to talk about, we're going to touch a little bit on why this matters to me, not me as an individual working in this industry or someone who's chosen hospitality as my vocation or career, but why does this matter to me as a little small boy who grew up here in Ireland, who's now chosen to work in Paris. Why do we think we're now seeing this trend grow? COVID is a massive part of that. And then also, where do I want, me personally as an individual, this sort of trend, if we can call it that, to continue growing in the future? So when I said, why does this matter to me as an individual? This isn't the best graph, but it's really hard to get accurate data. So when you come to Ireland, you think of one word, right? It's called the Emerald Isle. We're quite lucky here in Cork. Everything is green and beautiful. But I know it's a bit hard to see the countries, but this is the percent of forest cover in all European countries. The reason it's quite difficult is, without getting into politics, some places count the island of Ireland as one country, some people count the two. Northern Ireland, where I'm from for my sins, is the most deforested country in the last 100 years in Europe. And you think Ireland, being the green paradise that it is all the way down there, below the Netherlands, which is quite sad. I think one thing that we really get to see while we're here during Jameson Host is to understand a lot of Irish pride. Irish whiskey is such a big part of our culture, such an important part of our culture. And it's what you think when you come to Ireland. You have a stout, not naming the brand. You have Irish whiskey, and everything is green. But we're losing our green here, which is quite sad. I'm quite lucky. I get to go to all the beautiful parts of the country I grew up. And as I get older and older, those parts look less green and less green, which is a bit sad. But I'll try and not make this all doom and gloom. I'm quite lucky, and I get to attend a lot of talks and seminars about sustainability. And often those things are a bit sad, where you leave and you feel bad for liking pina coladas because you live in a country that doesn't grow pineapples and coconuts. I don't really want to do that. I want to be quite light and quite cheerful. And then what we're going to touch on is the importance of the right farming, how you can support and how you can celebrate that. So, is everyone familiar with the term permaculture farming? For those who aren't, I can do the most basic explanation because I'm not a farmer. I enjoy hearing about farming practices. I'm not an expert. I think the really, really simple way, if you take permaculture farming and monoculture farming, mono meaning one, as in one produce, it's almost the same if you look at our industry. When you take a bar that does cocktails and a craft cocktail bar, one is something that has an offering, another is something defined by its offering. Monoculture is a sort of style of farming that grew out of the Industrial Revolution, where there was a massive booming population. We, as humanity, had to create a way to feed people. Monoculture is not evil. Without monoculture, we would suffer famine. Here in Ireland, we suffered with that quite enough. But a permaculture farm is the old version of farming, where you would have vast land, you would have different soil, different crops, you would have lots of different things growing. And now, outside all of the different cities in pretty much every country in the world, permaculture farming is making a comeback. If you're from North America, you'll often hear them called no-till farms, as in they don't use any machines. You'll hear bioorganic farms, or in France, you'll hear bio, which is just bio in a fancy French accent. To give you an example of how different farms today are and how we go through them all and how also they're different and equally important, like I say, for simplicity, you can almost look at farms almost like cocktail bars, where in our industry, you might have a dive bar, a 5-star dive bar, a tiki bar, a fancy hotel bar, a neighborhood bar. It's the same with farms, right? You might be a tiki bartender. You might like going to tiki bars. You might be fancy in your suit, and you might like hotel bars. They're all equally important for the ecosystem that is the bar community. It is the exact same in farms. So this is to take you back. Some people from France might be familiar with this lovely gentleman. This is Etienne. A lot of the people that today I work with, which is about 37 different unique farms throughout France, which is quite a lot. They all have very different stories. Etienne is here as he is the first farmer, producer, who ever actually bothered to answer our phone. So it was during COVID. In France, we had a very strict first lockdown, similar to Hong Kong in a way. The second and third were kind of a piss take. They don't really matter. But in the first lockdown, we were confined. Bars were closed for 9 months, restaurants for 6, which was really weird. But we were trapped in France as foreigners living, working there with nothing to do. we had to reevaluate the way we wanted to work. And me and my now business partner at the time decided that we wanted to connect more to French agriculture. France itself, I think, being one of the best and prime examples of a growing nation. You have everything from Brittany to Alsace along the Channel, and then you've got all the beautiful plunder of the Mediterranean on the south coast. We spent 6 months renting giant vans, driving around France. Now, the problem with working with farmers, even though they're great, if you are a bar owner, bar manager, you work in a bar, and you need whiskey, we use Jameson for example, you phone your whiskey supplier, you order your Jameson, they say, cool, Wednesday between 11 and 2 it arrives. If you're trying to phone a farmer, you phone them, they don't answer their phone, they don't know who you are, you send an email, they're not checking emails, you WhatsApp them, they don't reply. Etienne was the first person who actually responded to our email. It wasn't a nice response. Essentially, he said, I don't know who you are, I don't really care, I'm really busy, I don't know what a cocktail bar is, this is where my farm is. If you really care, come to me. Etienne thought he was calling our bluff. We got in a car. We arrived at 9:30 the next morning, which from where Etienne is in a little town called Eus in the very southwest of France. It's actually the town that gets the most sunlight in all of Europe. Etienne was really surprised and said, who are you? We said, we're the ones who wrote you an email in really bad French. We're here. So this is a little bit about the actual farm. So it's a very historic citrus farm in Europe. It was the first farm in Europe that started growing Buddha's hand citrus. I'm sure you're all familiar. If not, it looks a bit like the citrus that looks like SpongeBob and Squidward had an evil little love baby. It looks like a little yellow squid. But this was the first sort of farm where they took citrus that is not native to Europe, tried to pollinate it and crossbreed it with bees to see if this citrus could then survive. So Etienne is sort of like a Willy Wonka of citrus fruit. He has about over 1,000 varieties of citrus. Growing up in Ireland, I thought there was maybe 10 max. And you go and you find things on his farm that only exists there. Because, again, he just breeds weird citrus with bees because that's his fun hobby. But Etienne took over the farm. It used to be run by a quite known man called Javier Batches. And this was a farm that had this sort of precedent or status to it that they only supplied 2- and 3-star Michelin restaurants. If you're a 1-star, you didn't even get a look in, or all of the Grand Palais and hotels in France. So when we arrived, being an Irishman and an Englishman, saying, can we buy all of your produce, please? He was a little bit shocked. But within an hour of being able to sit and chat to Etienne, we were walking through his little farm. And it's actually quite difficult because Etienne speaks really quickly and you're there trying to be cool for Instagram, take photos of everything. He's handing you citrus fruit, it's squirting everywhere, you're sticky, it's really hot, you're in a Parma tunnel. And we got into one of the last big tunnels. Like I said, it's like Willy Wonka. He's just giving you stuff, saying this is a Tanja Lo Lo Lo. And it sounds like a Rihanna song when he says it. And then we come into this big farm, and there's these giant pomelos that look almost like grapefruits, but they're all misshapen. And we said to Etienne, why do you have all these and why are they on the floor? And he's like, it's a pomelo. I was like, I don't know what that is. Essentially, he's got so many citrus fruit, he has to create pun names. It's a giant pomelo that is shaped like a Williams pear. So it's spherical and has a big point. And I said, okay, grand. Why do you have so many? And Etienne said, well, I only work with chefs. A lot of these big palaces buy my citrus fruit to make patisseries and desserts. And these pomelos are so big, they're 95% pith, there's not much fruit in it, and it's really, really bitter. And I said, well, it can't be that bitter. I ate a bit of the pomelo skin, and I couldn't taste anything for about 3 days after. It was that bitter, like more intense than absinthe. And Etienne said, yeah, citrus fruit is too bitter. No one has any need for it. And we said, well, Etienne, what's going to happen? All of these were going to decompose. Maybe he would have used them as fertilizer. This was essentially a citrus tree that had taken 2 years to crossbreed, 10 years to grow fruit that no one wanted. So then we shook Etienne's hand and went, how much does a pomelo cost? How many do you have? 135, we'll take all of them. To this day, Etienne is still in contact with us every week. By that, I mean also he's really busy. He doesn't ask us what we need. We now are at a point where Etienne just sends us produce to random distilleries we work with in Paris. Sometimes forgets to send an invoice, which also when you're starting a business is actually quite nice if someone gives you really expensive citrus fruit and you go, cool, I don't have to pay for that straight away, I think. But this is a bit that we're going to touch on later about trying to build your community as well. I'm in the process of trying to open a bar, which I'm sure after listening to Sean and Beckley and Esla is never a simple process. you're worried, you're stressed, you're scared about money. But if you have an opportunity to work with some of the best citrus in Europe, the guy knows who you are, he'll just send you stuff. So we don't know what our menu will look like, but all I know is we have 25 liters of a Chnodal liqueur made by Etienne Citrus sitting somewhere in a tank in Paris for us. This is the second farm, just to touch on another type of farm. So obviously you have these wonderful permaculture farms where all the work is about preserving the environment. But another issue we have, and another issue that we hit on, especially in France, is this sort of conception of farming. Now, especially after COVID, especially in France as a country and culture, it's amazing to live in. People care a lot about their wine. I think in Europe, especially wine-growing regions, people have a deeper connection to terroir and locality. Especially after COVID, people really came out caring about how healthy was their food, where was it from. And we work with another farm here, which is called Nature Bin. It's the largest rooftop farm in Europe, so it's really hard to see from here. One thing that they really struggle with is because, to give you a basic understanding of a rooftop farm, they can't ever be organic or bio in French because they don't grow in soil. Because if you have a giant rooftop stadium, you put soil on top, it rains, a bit like Ezra's bar in Boston. It rains, the soil gets heavy, roof collapses, people die. So they grow everything hydroponic and aeroponically. Yeah, not that people died in your bar, but that's, you kind of go, is bio worth it? But this is how they grow things. This little weird alien thing here, they essentially pump water through little chambers. When you see it, it's really, really cool for the first time. You look at it and you question yourself and you go, I want to work with farmers because I want to celebrate seasonality and I want to celebrate locality. Is this seasonal? Not really. I mean, it has a season, but a fake season. The way these planters work is they have 6 columns. They plant 2 at a time, then 3 and 4 and 5 and a 6. So every 3 weeks, strawberries, raspberries come into season. But you try them and they're delicious. And then you have to ask yourself, is this what we want to celebrate? Is this what we want to push? And then you look a little closer at the numbers and you see that by 2050, it's predicted that 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas. Globally, we produce less than 10% of our global produce in urban areas. And when you say urban areas, that's a 100-kilometer radius from that center point. So it's quite a big area, which is pretty scary. And you see these things, and again, we got speaking to them, and we said, what problems do you face? One, they were insane. They didn't have a minimum order. They didn't take payment up front. So a lot of restaurants would order from them, go, oh, it's COVID, we're closed. They would pick all of their produce and just leave it there. We were probably idiots at the time and said, yeah, we'll take 120 kilograms of tomatoes. No idea what to do with it. But now, to this day, there are people we're working with now, and when we just opened a little pop-up, they send us surprises of things every time without us asking. We've now gotten to a point where after 4 years of forming a relationship, it's the same relationship you'd have with an investor, your bar manager, your business partner. They know if they have produce that's going to go off or going to go moldy, we'll at least use it. You know what I mean? It's our responsibility to take on the responsibility for that produce and not put it in the bin. At the end of the day as well, when you're starting a business, if someone suddenly sends you something that's a lemon cucumber, you've never seen it, it looks a bit alien, but it's for free, that's not the worst way to run your P&L. And the third, this is just to give you a brief little oversight of what I briefly talked about, but this is a crazy AI image of some nondescript city and some cows because they're nearby. But that's sort of just some quick figures about the amount of produce that we need to sustain ourselves, but also the insanely small amount that we produce close to us. This is the third farm, just to tap in it really quick. This is a farm that I'm sure quite a few people in this room know. If you actually get to go to the lovely Barney in Paris and you go downstairs, a lot of these plants and herbs are hanging from the ceiling. Another really amazing company that we've come across is a company called Superette. And what they do is they take over old car parks. Paris is going through a little bit of a transformation, where essentially the mayor is very green and liberal thinking, that Paris is in a long process of pedestrianizing itself. Paris's goal is to get less cars and more people on the road. And a subsequent of that is there's a lot of car parks that no one can use. The apartments become apartments. Superette and various other mushroom growers are a collective where they're taking over old car parks. So in city planning and architecture, we call these brown sites, as in not green sites, new land that we need to take over and fill with concrete. And what they do as well is they grow everything kind of in this Breaking Bad section where it looks a bit alien and non-seasonal. But again, like I say, if you're a business and you know that you can get amazing micro cilantro, cauliflower, basil all year round, it's also pretty beneficial because so much of what we do is worrying, are the raspberries going to die? Is this farmer going to answer his phone? Has the farmer broken his leg? He can't pick my plums. With these guys, I know it's someone who smokes in a car park. I can WhatsApp Arno every day, and then they get cycled by electric bikes and dropped to my door twice a week. But just give you a little bit about Superette, it's the sort of thing that we want to see more and more and more of. They're partnered beside a mushroom farm, and they showed me a list of all of the places they send their mushrooms and their herbs to. And again, they're these wonderful fine dining French restaurants. And I think it's quite funny that if you were to go to this 3-star palace, I don't think anyone knows that all of their food was grown in a car park. But I quite like that juxtaposition of it. But like I say, these are the sort of people within our ecosystem that we want to celebrate, we want to care about. But that's when we say we talk about permaculture, it's such a wide range of farms. A farm isn't just something that's beautiful outside, there's dogs and it's idyllic. It's nasty, it's UV, it's in a car park. It's on a rooftop, done by water. And then I'm going to just briefly touch on sustainability as well. I know it gets to be this new dirty word in the industry that we're all probably sick of hearing about. People can look at it in lots of different ways, but this is essentially it. But what I want to talk about is how sustainability, similar to what Sean touched on as well, once you really focus on it, there's a way that it's just a better business model. There's a stat that we'll come to later that I was looking at when I was writing this speech that really, really floored me. I'm sure if anyone's familiar with the restaurant Silo in London. For anyone who isn't, it is the world's first zero waste restaurant. If you type it in, there's brilliant videos. There's one by the Financial Times. And Doug McMaster, the chef and owner of Silo, he was just asked, how does this work? How does not throwing anything out work? And what Doug said in very simple terms is, on average in London, the food cost for a restaurant is 35 to 40, 45%. Silo, their food cost is 10%. They don't throw anything out. So if you take away whether you want to be green, whether you want to push a world that cares more about the environment, erosion, from a purely business and profit point of view, the less you spend on your produce, the better business model. So this is as well, I had a very interesting interaction with someone in a pub a couple of weeks ago where they were very blunt and they said, why does sustainability actually matter? Cheers. Cheers. Glass. Thank you. I didn't know I was allowed to drink. This is lovely. But this is just to really quickly summarize it. Like I said, once you pull this curtain back of sustainability, it's really hard and sad not to talk about doom and gloom, not to talk about how the French wine industry is in peril and buying land in the south of England. It's not to talk about famine. It's not to talk about, well, even though I am talking about it. But to very quickly tap on 3 things. Like I said, Silo, the way that they have food costs is unbelievable and undeniable. It's also something that we've talked about as well is marketing. In France, what we see in general is Paris in France is one of the most amazing countries in the world. It's a beautiful city. It's full of amazing restaurants. In Paris, when we look at operating and owning bars, you have a very high quality type of tourism where you have what we refer to as gastro-tourism, where people are coming to Paris to discover France. People might come to Paris for a couple of days, go to some amazing bars. They might treat themselves to a Michelin-star restaurant. They take a day trip to Cognac or to Champagne, whereas in other cities have a lot of tourism. It might not be the same caliber of tourism. France is very lucky. People come to Paris to immerse themselves in that Frenchness, whether it be fine dining, fine drinking. And we got to a point, especially after COVID, where the tourists coming to Paris, they wanted as much French things as possible. Paris isn't the cheapest city. It's so fetishized and globalized, whether that's from Emily in Paris or Top Chef. Paris is pushed down your throats as being the mecca of fine food and drink. But also for the local people, especially after COVID, like I say, it's not just French people, but I think in Mediterranean and that climate as well, people have a desire to know where things are from. You're brought up with such a knowledge about wine and region and terroir that you have a lot more care, especially from growing up in Ireland. You want to know where this is from. You know that this cheese is from this region. You know that the Mirabelles are in season because you have a tartlet Mirabelle and you don't get that all year round. Where in the more almost Anglophone world, in the UK, Ireland, the US, it's not the same. You're used to having things 365 days a year because you want it. Being able to turn around and say, everything we do is French, everything we do is seasonal, or even showcase your traceability about where you get everything from a business or a bar point of view, that's your USP, that's your selling point, which is quite funny now. People come to our venue, it's an Irish man, an English man, and a Scottish man. It's almost like a bad joke, but everything in there is French. We are foreigners trying to do business in a foreign country, but for the local French guests, they know that everything we have is French. For people coming as a tourist, it doesn't matter whether we're French or not. Everything that we are going to serve them is French. And then also the one I say, I want to be very positive and don't want to touch on it that much, but the planet is changing, whether we like it or not. The French wine industry, just to touch on it, and especially the champagne industry, they're buying land in the south of England. I was at a wedding last week, a family wedding in England, and my family are now growing olives in Kent, which is insane. I'm happy because they're tasty olives, but that shouldn't be happening. And like I say, less so in the south, but especially in the north of Ireland, the deforestation, even in my lifetime, and I know it's my birthday, but I'm not very old, the fact that I haven't yet hit 30 yet, and I can see the effect on the climate of deforestation due to monoculture farming in my backyard is actually quite scary. But that's all sad stuff, and you have a drink in your hand, so we'll flick on from that. So this is one thing myself and Tony spoke about quite at length when he first phoned me. I can talk about what it's like to have to deal with 30 French farmers on the phone. I can talk about what it's like creatively to get really good raspberries and how to try and translate that into a glass. I can tell you what time of year I think raspberries are best to make them into a liqueur or a wine. But what we spoke about is actually leaving people with some advice on how to start working this way. Because one thing we've spoken so much about bar ownership and the difference of taking ownership. A lot of you in this room might not be in the position where you can turn around and say, we'll fundamentally change the business model and the direction and marketing of your venue, of your bar. But if you work in a venue and you have the ability, if you're left with the responsibility of creating a drink that goes on the menu, if you can take the responsibility, the ownership of where you get that cherry for your Irish whiskey old fashioned, if you can find someone locally who's growing cherries, you might buy all of their cherries. That's one little step in the small direction. But when you look at the economic input, the more you control of where your venue spends its money, that's the more power, and the actual producer growing those cherries gets the benefit from it. So I'm going to break my advice down into almost 3 sections. Is one about stealing and borrowing your information. And after today, as someone who's getting ready to open my own venue, I'm stealing and borrowing a lot from Ezra and Beckley. I know my business partners already phone them every week for lots of advice. When it comes to trying to create a venue, I know I'm going to steal so much of what Sean has said. But I've already mentioned a few people who inspire me from a sustainable point of view, but hopefully I'm going to share ways in which you can actually steal from people more. So to tap on a book that I've actually never read because I didn't have time. But I think the first thing that you can really do is look at people who inspire you and be honest about it, but also see what they do and try and copy that. I think we live in a world where there's so much focus on who you are and what you do due to social media. It's really important to look at what someone else is doing well and say, I just want to copy that. I want to steal their ideas and implement it in what I do. So I don't want to touch too much on my own project, but even from, well, as you guys are there, from Shapes, the functionality of having drinks ready to serve, while that's from your end inspired by Bauhaus and functionality, you take away so much of the time from making that drink and you create so much more time in front of the guest that you can create those real magical moments of hospitality. We're going to steal that because we're inspired by that. I'm only picking them because they're in the front row. But this is a list of 3 people who I'm sure you guys have heard of, but why they inspire me. And I'm going to tell you how I borrow or selectively steal from them. So Matt Wiley, I'm sure you all know from Ree in Sydney. Ree is an amazing bar, as the bar was literally built upon waste. Matt had spent his career doing consultancy and opening bars in London. By the time he moved to Sydney to open his bar, he decided that he had the opportunity to build a bar from the startup, which is amazing. You don't often have that opportunity. And Matt decided that he cares about waste. So instead of opening a bar, he was going to build a bar from waste. I think that's amazing. We asked Matt, how do you find these companies who make these wonderful fake marble from old kitchen plastic? How did you find the people in your community making lamps from mushroom mycelium? He told me how. We're in Paris, he's in Sydney. It's not the same contacts, but Matt helped us and gave us advice on how we can do that for our project. So now we're looking at hopefully opening in 2 months, but everything that we can, when we have the power, is going to be made by French hands, by French artisans from recycled French products. But if we didn't reach out to Matt, we wouldn't have had the confidence to take that step or take that direction for our own project. Mr. Lion, Ryan Cianetti, White Lion was an amazing bar that I've never been to. But White Lion opened in 2013, which is insane. And one of the first videos, remember when you started bartending, you'd watch videos on how to make a drink, and you'd understand this is a massive community with global competitions. One of the first videos about drinks I ever saw was Ryan and Jamie Oliver, a very famous British chef, in White Lion making a drink. In 2013, they opened a bar in East London that had no ice, no perishables, no lime juice, no produce that could go off. Everything was batched, and that was insane to me. I mean, this is so long ago, he had a vacuum machine, and that blew my freaking mind. 11 years ago, they decided to challenge what people expected from a bar, but it wasn't in a pretentious way. You wouldn't go and they'd explain why they did something. They were doing it because they thought they were giving the guests the best experience. And we just touched on, right? We all do this because we're here and we like it. And we want to leave people with hospitality and a reason to come back. And we want to create a way to connect through people. And White Lion was amazing from that. Fast forward to today, we're Lion Group. They're in multiple hotels in Washington, Amsterdam, multiple venues in London. But at their core, even though they have their philosophy and they have their styles in making drinks, they're championing and pushing this idea of really approachable hospitality. You can do something very high line, but still make it that it's about connecting and resonating with your guests, which is something I don't think we can ever forget about. And then the third person I've touched on is Doug from Silo, who's now opening a zero waste restaurant in Mexico with a very good friend of mine, Pablo, which is amazing. One, opening a zero waste restaurant in London seems insane. The challenges of now going on to open one in Mexico on a farm is beautiful. If you haven't, I'm sure Silo people know, but Baldeo is just opening in Mexico. It's really interesting what they do, and they're definitely worth a follow online. But they're amazing as they have a farm. Pablo is someone, the owner of the farm, Baldeo working with. Pablo is someone I speak to every day because he is running a farm in Mexico. He is trying to preserve that culture of pre-colonial Aztec farming and making sure that's still relevant in Mexico. And now he's trying to push that into this modern fine dining world in zero waste. We steal everything about how we work with products, how we work with seasonality from Pablo on his farm, Arquitera. Every idea he has for farms and produce and how to present that, we steal from him. And it's the same with Doug as well. I can tell you, for me personally, the Silo restaurant Instagram account is 100% the account I visited most. Every time they post something about something fermented or a technique for preserving, I'm stealing that, I'm saving that in my scrapbook. And now that we have our chef on board for the project, that's what we're laying out. That is what we want to get to. And thankfully, Silo were very open and transparent that they share how they did that, so I can then do that. This is a community reference because it's the best TV show to ever exist. So create your community. One thing, again, that really was a privilege to be here is this is a community that I grew up in. This global bar community is a community I choose to be in. And one thing that Jameson host is so centered about is creating your community and your network. Since the bars reopened in COVID in Paris, we started running a lot of giant masterclasses where we brought in all the other bars. We gave them lunch, we gave them drinks. A brand and a bar came to do a talk. And then we invited people in, but to talk about subjects that were relevant to us. So in the year after COVID, we had people who were growing mycelium, outside Paris unrelated to bars. We had perfume makers, we had chefs, we had wellness experts. We had to create a community that now, like I say, we are reaping the benefit as if we need anything for our bar, these people have our backs. But it took us to, one, migrate into the French bar community. But the idea was that we now have these people that we can rely on and we can reach out. A really good example is composting. Is really, really hard to do in Paris because essentially the syndics have so much power. We wanted to compost any waste we had because we didn't have that much space. A really good example about that is if you want to compost and your syndic says no, it's a no. If you and your bar down the road and every other bar in that industry wants to compost, that's going to be a stronger message. And now today, most of the bars in Paris work with an amazing company called The Alchemists, where they give you a compost bin. And the way they work is amazing. They hire essentially ex-convicts and give them their first job outside of prison. One time a week, these people cycle around with the bins on the back of a bike. They pick up your compost, they take it away, and then conveniently they give it to one of the farms we work with, which is perfect. This company, The Alchemists, started, the idea was they wanted to take office waste from all the big offices outside Paris. None of the offices were that interested. And now they have a grounding working with bars and restaurants in the city center, which is great. But this conversation about composting, it took us 5 years to get to this point. At the time, it took Little Red Door, the team from the Cambridge and Copper Bay, and a restaurant in a little market. It took us 4 years to be able to find these people, connect with them, and get them to set up and look after our food compost. And I think this is the most important one as well, that we talk about culture. It's the ability to, oh, I'm colorblind. Is this amber? Grand. Well, stop me when people are hungry. I'm good? Deadly. As well as creating that culture about community. Sometimes you're so scared about trying something because you want to fail. It's okay to try something, especially if you're looking at food waste within your venue. Sure, it's all really nice to want to take your food waste and make a garnish. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're not going to put that garnish on the drink if it doesn't look right or taste right. But actually accepting the culture within your venues that you want people to try. It doesn't matter if the result doesn't work out. You find and you learn along the way and you'll learn for next time. And then I think the last one, so I think this is the most important thing as well. Like when you get to sit here and be surrounded by people who care and share so much, is being transparent. And in the last 5 years, we've had so many people come up to us and they've seen maybe things that me or my business partner Alex have done, and they've been, I don't want to say impressed, but said, oh, it's really cool. I wish I could have done that. How did you do that? I guess you'll never tell me. And you kind of look at this industry and you go, what is intellectual property? The amount of times I've sent people our prep sheet, our spec sheet, the amount of times that bartenders reach out and said, oh, I love your glassware. Right, here's the catalog, here's the contact, here's their office hours. Tell them I recommended you. The more you push and create that community, the stronger it becomes. And also the most important thing is be transparent. What we're looking at now and what we want to do with our venue that's in the middle of opening is we want to push all the work that we enjoyed from being in our last venue, Little Red Door, and we want to push that to be as far as we go. Will our bar Davy open and be 100% zero waste? Probably not, because the fundamentals of the business, we have to make sure we pay our rent, we pay our staff, they're happy, the guests who come like us and come back. Does it mean that in 4 or 5 years we don't want to push to be that? It means that while it's important to us, paying the people who want to work with us and paying the people who grow our produce first is more important. You know, it doesn't mean that we can't be transparent, that that's our goal. We might always gradually crawl towards it, and if we get 95% of the way there, that might be enough. One thing as well, when we talk to all of the producers is, do you know 12 farmers? The same with bartenders. If you have a problem and you need a carbonation rig for your Jameson cocktail, you might not have one. Tony Pancakes might not have one, but someone in Cork City is going to have one. I think as well is the most important thing about being transparent as well is so much of my job is to worry about, like I say, not being depressing. And imagine if someone came into a bar, I served them and they left being depressed about the state of the world and climate change and water scarcity. As a hospitality professional, I will have done a pretty bad job. That guest might have loved a drink that might not come back, so I might make them feel bad about their CO2 emissions. That would be an insane way to do hospitality. I think one of the most emotional and learning moments I had was with the farm, the big rooftop farm we were working with. They had these beautiful raspberries, and we wanted to make this really tart, explosive raspberry vermouth. Halfway through the production, nature being phone us, our raspberries had a blight. We were scratching our heads, being like, they're on a rooftop in a tube. How did they get a disease? All of the raspberries died. And I think that there's two options you could deal with this solution. I agree with both options. I can understand why different bars and different people and different venues would have made those two options. The first option is to panic and say, shit, no more raspberries. I need good raspberries. Maybe the south of Spain, maybe the south of Italy, in warmer climates, they'll have some raspberries. Some venues, some bars might think, the drink is called raspberry. I want to make the best raspberry drink in the world because I want the guests to have the best raspberry drink and I want them to come back. You might buy raspberries from someone you don't know, South Italy, south of Spain. That's option one. That's fine. There's definitely been points in my career I would have chosen option one because you're obsessed with making a good drink. That's why you're a bartender. That's what you want to do. Option two is picking up the phone to the producer who's lost 65% of their crop and said, well, life's shit. You have no raspberries. Do you have strawberries? You can make a raspberry vermouth that might be 50% strawberry. Is it the best raspberry vermouth? No. Does the drink taste good? Yeah. Is it 95% of the drink you wanted it to be? Maybe. And then you have this thing about not sharing your failures. And I think we had an example, these guests came in, they had this drink, and I told them the story about the raspberries. And they said they love raspberries, their favorite fruit. And I went, well, joke's on you, it's 50% strawberry. And they laughed. I got to talk about the farm having the blight. In my head, I was so worried that I didn't want to share this sort of failure. But the more transparent I was with that guest, they were back in the bar every day at 5 o'clock at open for a week, which was amazing. So it's just one little small thing I was thinking of this week about the transparency of it. We have in our heads that we're trying to be perfect and create this perfect little moment for a guest, but the more you open yourself up to be human and the more you share and the more you fail, I think the more you connect with people, especially when you focus this whole sustainable thing and you kind of forget the hospitality behind it, that sort of honesty is a really amazing way to also do business. I'm aware I've rambled and went on a little bit, and there's now things blinking at me. So one thing we always say, we're here for the rest of the night. Everyone says, reach out, chat. That is my email. That is my Instagram. I'm like Sean. I hate emails. I didn't work in bars to answer emails. I also hate Instagram very much with a passion. But if people have questions, I know sometimes in crowds, people are afraid to reach out and ask because you don't want to ask a silly question. There's no such thing. But I'm here for today and tomorrow and in Dublin. If you have questions, I will share every mistake I've made in the last 5 years, and I make hundreds. That's pretty much me. This clock is starting to stress me out.
If there are any questions... Barney, we have a question over here.
Hi. It's really weird because I can't see anyone past the front row,
That's
so
all right.
it's really strange.
I'm a white dude with glasses. I look like everyone else too. My question is, particularly with classic cocktails, citrus, particularly lemon and lime, is such a crucial part to 60% of all classics. If you're going for a hyper-local or a hyper-seasonal menu, how do you convince the local zeitgeist that super citrus or Tangelo in season is going to appeal to that gimlet-style cocktail that people want?
I'll be very transparent with this to take my own advice. It's not I don't care. I haven't juiced a lime in 6 years. And it's not I'm a superstar bartender and I'm above doing any of my juice. We got rid of citrus juice in Little Red Door 6 years ago. I haven't worked with citrus juice in an amount of years. And with classic cocktails, that's the thing, you don't want to disappoint them, but it comes with being transparent. And I'll use our time at Little Red Door as the best example. And something we'll do at DeVee is we'll be beside Experimental, which is a very good classic cocktail forward bar. Imagine if someone came in to me when I was working at Little Red Door and they wanted a margarita, right? I have two options. I can say, I don't have tequila because I think it's insane for bars in Paris to have something they always pick to the other side of the world and sent over. I don't have limes because it's summer. I have Cointreau because it's French and it's from there. But then that's a pretty shitty guest experience, right? I think that we underestimate our power and skill in hospitality, but it's easy to say to someone, we have something like that. It uses verjus, It's acidic, grape juice, yum, grapes, cognac, France, eat the terroir. We don't have tequila. We have this really nice unaged brandy. Or maybe, hey, we have a pepper spirit that we got people to grow peppers. We've toasted it. We've distilled it. We've tried to make the closest thing to an agave spirit possible, but using peppers. And I think if you're all in a bar and someone said to you, oh, we can't do a margarita, but we spent like a year and a half trying to make an agave spirit from peppers. Do you want to try it? No one's ever said no. In the off chance someone says no, and that's the point where you have to fish in hospitality to your ethos and your line of who you want to be. Where if a guest really just wants a margarita, then I think it's our responsibility to say, this is who we are, this is what we do. If you really want an amazing margarita, Candelaria, one of the most celebrated bars in the world, is 60 seconds around the corner. I'll walk you there and introduce you to the bartenders. The margaritas are fantastic. I think you get to a point, especially when you have to define your niche, it's okay to say no. And I think the real test and skill of hospitality is not having to say no, but presenting other options. It's also really, fuck yeah.
Are there any other questions at the moment?
I've got a bachelor's degree in environmental science.
Yeah.
Majoring in sustainability. Do you talk to scientists much?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Again, I'm an idiot. I'm not sure if you've seen my notes. It just says farms have dogs. That's it. I'm aware sometimes I present myself as being this idiot, but my role and my job and what I really love is getting people to go, aren't farms great? People go, why? I'm like, you work in bars and restaurants. Isn't good produce the key to making a good plate, a good dish? I don't know anything. I've now got to a point where I'm transparent with myself, where if I'm calling myself an idiot, I don't think I'm diminishing myself. There are so many topics in the world I have a low knowledge level about. I know that I'm passionate about farms. So much of my day is meeting people like yourself, much more intelligent than I am, where I can say, how do you look after growing food? Why are you growing food this way? Like, for example, that farm on a rooftop, when I first saw it, I went, oh, it's grown in a plastic pipe. And then they explained their reason about trying to make sure they can feed cities. And then at the end of the day, when you taste their strawberries and raspberries, they taste good and you care about that. Like I say, I see it as my role is trying to find these places that I think are important to me and important for the businesses I represent. And then to touch on the hospitality, I leave that stuff to the smarter people. And my role is grabbing people and being like, oh, if you go to a farm, they have a dog. Isn't this fresh raspberry really cool? Yeah, drinks, done. But yeah, most of my job is talking to smarter people. I don't necessarily understand everything they say, but that's why I'm talking to them, you know.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Barney.
very much.